So once you have your grout mixed up, time for the grout float. So you want your grout float nice and clean. You don't want any contaminants in your grout. And then you basically start by scooping up a small portion. Creamy peanut butter. If it's not creamy, then either add water or add powder. And you're basically going to use this grout float as a squeegee. So that's how I'm getting it on the wall. But as I'm spreading, the motion as I'm spreading is I'm pushing in. So right now you're going to see me going around, and all I'm doing is thinking in my mind that as I'm moving it, I'm slowly dropping the angle so that it's pushing the grout into the grout joint. So you push, squeegee off, and you push. That's basically grouting. Push, squeegee off, rinse, and repeat. The hardest part when you're spreading grout is the corners and the bottom and the perimeter. So what I like to do is I'll spread it on the wall just like that, get it off my float, catch a little section like that so it builds up on the edge of the trowel or the float, and I'll use that to push in to the corners like that. And you want to see the grout ooze out as you're pushing. That's a real good indicator that it's going into the grout joint. Because you want the grout to fully go inside the cavity and fill up the edges of the tile, especially on a floor tile. It's going to make the tile more sturdy and stable as people walk on it. Prevent cracking and chipping. Again, we use the edge to pull off a little bit, and you're basically just pushing it into the corner. So when you're pushing it in, you can see how the grout is oozing out. That means I'm putting enough force into the grout so that it's going into the tile. Because that's what you're trying to do with grout. You're trying to fill up the grout joints. You want to make sure that they're full enough so that they don't concave and look like that's actually a sign of a bad grout job, when the grout looks like it's concaving into the cavity. You want it to look nice and full, nice and even. Okay, so I'm gonna pick a small section and do it completely. So I'll do, let's say these 3 tiles will be my section that I plan to do in my head before I move on. That's one key to grouting, is if you pick a small section and do it completely before you move on to the next section, you can work more efficiently. When you're grouting, you'll tend, as a beginner, you'll tend to want to jump from spot to spot. But if you remember in your head that if you do a small section, you'll be more efficient with your time and energy. Okay, so after you spread it, what I'm trying to do is I'm squeegeeing off all of the excess. So notice here how I pretty much hold the grout float tight against the tile, and with a nice flexible grout float like this, the grout will squeegee off this tile really easy. So it's very important to have a good quality grout float. And at this time, when you're scraping the corners, you notice how there's plenty of grout on there. As long as there's more grout than you need, you're good. Say you were to cut that corner and put too much pressure, you would actually dig the grout out, which is defeating the purpose of what you're doing. So whenever you're squeegeeing away grout, you want to make sure at least you leave the grout joint full. If you leave it kind of empty, then you're working against yourself. So right there, I pushed too hard, and the piece of rubber on the grout float went into the grout joint and dug out the grout. So I spent all this time to push this grout into the grout corner, and with a bad angle, bad pressure, I worked against myself and pulled all the grout right on out. So now I gotta push that back in there. Okay, so like I said, squeegee off the excess is the next phase. So once we get all the excess off, we're ready for the next phase after that, which is wiping. Before I move on to wiping, I inspect my section. As a beginner, you'll notice a lot of missed spots or cavities. So after you're done spreading, inspect and make sure you've completely filled it in and then you can move on to cleaning, which I am gonna start now. So, what you do is you wring out the water out of your sponge as much as possible. The more water you wring out of your sponge, the less water you're gonna transfer over to the tile and grout. So, if you do what I'm doing, which is a small section, and I'm gonna start right away, it's very important that you pull all of the water out of this grout sponge because it's still very, very wet. Now say I spread more of an area, say I spread this entire area. By the time I came to wipe this, it would be much harder because maybe 20 minutes have passed. In that case, you wouldn't need to pull every ounce of water out of this because it's not so crucial. The grout has set up, it's gotten a little firmer, a little harder. Right now, since I'm wiping it as soon as I spread it, I have to be very delicate. So as a beginner, be careful, be mindful that you don't leave too much water in a freshly grouted section. So, what I like to do is I like to get this small margin trowel. You know, they sell these at all the box stores. And I like to clean all my corners with this. And I like to clean my corners first just so that I get all that excess grout off of the tile so that when I'm spreading with my sponge, I'm not spreading around that excess and making more work for myself. When you have fresh grout like I do, you don't need to use a lot of force. You don't even need to do a lot of wiping. Rule of thumb when you're grouting, first step is you do circular motion, right? Circular motion, circular motion. And you're gonna do that over your grout joints. You're gonna do it over the tile. When you get to the grout joint, you wanna make sure it looks nice and even. If there's any sort of high spots or low spots, then after you got the excess off, then you go over it perpendicular to the line and make sure it's nice and even, because a good grout joint is an even grout joint and full. When I said perpendicular, I meant parallel. Let's do the circular motion, get all the excess off. I've been doing this, like I said, 3rd generation tile setter. I could probably do this wall in maybe 30 minutes, 45 minutes. As a beginner, I could easily see this job taking you all day. But I think with these tips I'm teaching you, the final product will be what you need. Speed comes with practice. As a beginner, you're just not gonna have it. So the time, who cares how long it takes you? As long as you follow these steps, your grout joint and your grout job will look identical to as if I did it. And I'm the guy you paid to come over and who charges the big bucks to make this look so good. So after you do the circular motion, which is to get all the excess off, then you do the final wipe. This is called the final wipe. Suncoast Remodeling has coined this technique and term, so copyrighted 2023. No, I'm just kidding. But my dad taught me this and my grandpa taught him this. And the final wipe is you do one wipe, turn the sponge, do another wipe, don't wipe anymore. Clean the sponge. Once you clean your sponge, do it again. You can only do one wipe on one face of the sponge. You want to resist the temptation to keep spreading, but all you're doing is spreading your mess. You can't see it, but I'm getting this tile perfectly clean. The less grout you leave at this phase, the better off you'll be with final cleanup. So this final wipe technique is huge. So remember that. It's a lot of work, a lot of elbow grease, but if you want to make it look like a pro did it, do how the pros do it. This corner that I just did is basically done. So a lot of times, just because I'm here, I'll pull the tape. So I'm gonna pull this tape now. And say I have more to do up there, I'm not gonna pull the tape to the section I haven't done yet. So I'll pull the tape to there. And that way I can see exactly how the grout is looking to the other surfaces that I'm grouting next to. In this case, it's drywall. On the floor, it's a porcelain tile. And this porcelain tile has a different color grout. And if you look closely here, you can see that some of the grout went underneath this tape. So even though you're taping your surfaces, you can't assume that it's doing its job 100% and stopping the grout from going underneath. So what I like to do is I pull the grout tape to the section I'm doing, and that way I'm not surprised at the end of the job to if my tape worked well or not. So you can see that my tile got a little messy, and it's because of the grout that I just smeared. And this is a different color grout, so here, let me cut this away. So I removed my protective covering completely in this small section. Don't want to do the entire section because I'm still spreading, but at least right now I can see how my grout looks compared to my floor. So this floor tile has a brown grout with a brown tile, and I just spread white grout. It's going to look pretty ugly if I leave this white grout residue on top of this brown grout. Scrape out any excess, and then I'm going to clean it. And the final wipe works perfect on here. Say I was to keep wiping with a sponge that I should have final wiped, I'm just going to continue to spread the mess I just cleaned up. So one final wipe, turn the sponge, I'm going to find a corner that's clean, finish that wipe, and then that looks much better. Once this dries, this is going to leave a small haze on it. So whatever type of grout you're doing, you know, because you're spreading grout on top of the tile, you just can't help it. Even no matter how many times you do the final wipe, there's a small amount of haze that sits on top of this tile. So right when that dries, I want to say maybe 15 to 20 minutes after it dries on your tile, come back with a microfiber cloth, and you're basically just going to wipe and buff it off completely. At that point, your wall is grouted and you're done. All right, guys, I know I talked a lot. I said a lot of details in the grouting. You know, grouting is not as simple as it looks. If you follow my steps step by step, you're gonna get a nice finished product. So basically in this small little section, what I did here, I want you guys just to repeat that. And you can scale that up to whatever size project you're doing, but you now know 3rd generation tile setter tips on how we're getting grouting done. So hopefully that helps on your tile project. Let me know in the comments.